Today I want to talk about sourcing analytics. Probably this is the first time you heard about this term, but let me say this, right? If inventory is the cornerstone of supply chain management, then sourcing is probably the most important problems that every company faces because it's about supply management. And sourcing analytics is barely covered in any curriculums as far as I know. However, sourcing is covered, but mainly conceptual, which has limited value. And after today's sharing and workshop, you will see how interesting and important sourcing analytics is. So let me start with the amazing story of Apple's iPhone. Apple reinvented the smartphone, right? But its integrated circuits supplier, which is Samsung, took over the global market, right, by its cost advantage. Right, look at this chart to your right, right? That's the units sold in minutes in the world by Samsung and Apple for iPhone for smartphone. So the question for Apple is, right? How can Apple continue success? Right, its major supplier moved downstream to compete with Apple, right? So how can Apple solve this challenging problem in sourcing? All right, so my name is Yao, and today I'd like to share a new course module on sourcing analytics, right? On exploring and selecting suppliers globally, right? For students to learn three things. First, supplier intelligence, right? How to explore and select suppliers globally. And second, bargaining power analysis. That is how to measure the leverages and also the negotiation power. Well, this actually is surprisingly simple, right? It's quantifiable and surprisingly simple. And finally, supplier benchmarking, right? How to compare, right? Once you have the potential suppliers, you need to compare the pricing, the risks, and also supply capabilities. How do we do that? Now, let me just tell you a little bit more about the Apple iPhone story, right? Apple reinvented the smartphone. Right? That's the first multi-touch screen phone and made a huge money, right? Huge money from it. So from 2007 to 2010, Apple made $27 billion with a profit of 15.6 billion. And sourcing contributes significantly to iPhone's financial success. Right? Apple designs and sells the phone, but manufacturing nothing. So all the manufacturing is outsourced. And Apple was so good at sourcing, right? And if you look at the gross margin for iPhone, it's 56%. So more than half of the revenue, right, is Apple's margin. And remember this number because we're going to use it later, 56%. And to whom Apple outsourced, right? Well, including Samsung, actually 27% of iPhone's supply is taken. It was accountable for by Samsung, and of course many other suppliers such as Intel, Inferno, right, Epson, and so on and so forth. However, shortly after, right, Samsung introduced its own smartphone, which looks pretty much the same, right? Also failed the same, and took over the global market by its cost advantage, right? Samsung definitely had the advantage. That's why Apple outsourced to it, right? But Samsung used that advantage, right? Eventually to compete with Apple. So the question is, what should Apple do in terms of sourcing? How can Apple continue the success? Right, this is a real story. Now, this story does not stand alone. It's actually quite common in practice. We see it everywhere, right? So one company invented a technology, right, to reduce the cost and improve its profitability, outsourced to a low-cost supplier. And eventually, a supplier use its cost advantage and take over the market, right? This could happen to anybody, right? Any country. And here I just use an example, which is well known, right? US versus China. Right. Okay. Now, this could, like I said, this could happen to anybody, right? Any country, right? Now, let me ask, maybe we should stop global sourcing. Well, global sourcing, what I can say is irresistible because it just brings so much benefit, as we'll see on the next slide. So the right question to ask is perhaps how to source globally to maximize the benefit, let's say the cost savings, for example, and avoid the risks. Right. So how to do that? Let's first look at the benefit of global sourcing. Why, the CEOs, especially multinationals, they like sourcing, global sourcing so much. Let's just look at the numbers. Okay, and you will see what happened. So here I listed 7 major industries, right, for US companies. You can do the same thing for other countries as well. And the blue bar shows the average size of companies, right, in this industry. And the red bar plus the dark red bar, right, together, this shows the cost breakdown of that revenue. And here I only listed the cost goods sold, which is in red, and also the net income, which is in dark red. Now, let's look at, for example, consumer staples, right? Companies in this industry is very large, and they spend a lot of money on cost of goods sold. That's how much they purchase from suppliers, right? And also their internal manufacturing, of course. If you can save 1% in cost of goods sold, right? For average consumer staple company, that is about 8%, 0.8% of the revenue, right? Because cost of goods sold accounts for about 80%, right, of the revenue. So if you can save 1% of cost of goods sold, that is 0.8% of the revenue. And because their net margin is only 4.2%, right, that 0.8% actually is 18% of the profit, right? So suddenly you increased your profit by 18%. Think about how the stock market is going to respond to this. There's a close connection or correlation between net income and your market cap, right? So that's why it's so attractive. It's irresistible, right, for the CEOs, right, of these companies, right, to source globally. Now this is consumer staples. Let's look at another one. Let's look at healthcare. Healthcare does not For healthcare, cost of goods sold does not account that much a percentage of the revenue. It's about 55%, right? But still, if you have 1% savings in cost of goods sold, it's about 0.5% of the revenue. And if you look at their net margin, which is only about 3% or 2%, right? So 1% savings in cost of goods sold is equivalent to 16% increase in profit. Right now, even for healthcare, even for IT, right, with a huge margin, right, 1% savings in cost of goods sold still result in 3% increase in profit. Of course, these are the average numbers. So I think now you understand why outsourcing is so important, right? But let's also look at the risk, right? As we have just experienced in the pandemic, the risk of outsourcing, especially global outsourcing, can be huge, right? It's not only just quality, right? Sometimes it's even business continuity issues because resilience, right? That's what everybody was talking about, right? Supply chain global restructuring, right? We need more reliable supplies, right? And in addition to all of this, there is IP, intellectual property, there is potential competition or leakage and so on and so forth, right? Or you have to handle all these risks. Now, handling this risk is not a small task. It's very challenging because supply management is and the scale is very big. Okay, you are dealing with lots of suppliers, lots of POs, and millions, if not billions of dollars. And let's look at supplier selection, right? You need to frequently adjust your supply base, right? Because then new suppliers coming up, and there is corporate changes, such as merger acquisitions going on all the time. Once you have the supplier locked in, right? or recruited, you still have to manage them. Right? Think about the dollar value, right? The sheer number of suppliers, and the number of SKUs you're managing, right? So what I'm saying is sourcing is data-driven, right? But before we talk about how to select suppliers, right? How to rationalize suppliers, let's first talk about how to define your needs and also your supplier selection criteria. And that's the most important thing. You can understand what you need, right? And you need to align your selection criteria with your company's strategic objectives. So what I need is, so from now on, I'm going to use Apple iPhone as the example, right, to illustrate all these methodologies, right? Because Apple is one of the technology hardware storage peripheral companies. So let's look at this industry as a whole, right? First, so as you can see here, right, I have plotted some data to show after 2023, right, this industry's trend in terms of total revenue, right, total operating income, and net income, right, and also percentage of companies profitable. Right now, the first thing I observe is the pandemic, which is happened in the year 2021, benefited this industry a lot. So you see a huge jump in total revenue and profits, right, for this industry, which is in green for United States, right? It's also beneficial for some other countries such as South Korea and Japan. Japan is a little small, so you can't see clearly, but you will see overall the pandemic has benefited this industry across the world. Now, however, post-pandemic, the industry is going down. Okay. Now, globally, Apple's competitors, right, include Samsung, right, and for smartphones, and Xiaomi from China, and some other companies from Europe and from different countries, from Taiwan, for example. Now, its major competitor actually is Samsung, right? And Samsung has grown into a size that is comparable, almost comparable to Apple. Okay. All right. Now let's look at Apple's profitability. Right. In this chart, I have x-axis, which is the total revenue. Y-axis, this is the operating margin. Right. And we can plot a curve like this. Right. It's like an envelope of the data, and that actually represents the profit frontier. That is the most profitable companies in each of these revenue class. Okay, and you can see that Apple is on the curve, which is great. However, if you look at the operating margin, Apple is definitely not the highest, right? And Microsoft is very high. Meta is also higher, but of course they have smaller size. Right? But what you can conclude is Apple net in the revenue, right? But not profit margin. Right, some of our old friends are here, such as IBM, HP, and Intel, and they're not doing very well in this year. Okay, but that's another story, but let's focus on Apple. And finally, let's use our revenue breakdown, right, to look at their cost components, right, which one is the major driver. And we can see that cost of goods sold is still the major driver, accounts for more than 50%, 55% of the total revenue. And now let's come back to the iPhone's gross margin, 56%. And you can see that, all right, in this year, 2023, Apple's gross margin, overall gross margin, is only about 44%. Right, so that's a problem, right? Okay, so summarizing all these information, right, or data, or insights, we can say that if you're Apple, what would you say about your, CPU supplier selection criteria? Right, the first thing, of course, is technology and supplying capability. Right, so the supplier has to be innovative, right, technologically and engineering capable. And second, the supplier should have enough capacity, right, production and supply chain capacity, so they will be able to meet your demand. Right, if your volume goes up, then they can follow up. right? That's a very important thing. The first thing, right? And second thing would be cost savings. That's why we outsource, right? That's what we're looking for. We want a supplier that is cheap, right? And can offer us attractive pricing. And even with that pricing, the supplier can still be profitable. So the supplier can continue offering that good pricing to us. Okay, this is very important. Lower pricing, attractive pricing, plus profitability. We hope that, as Apple, right, we have bargaining power over our suppliers. Whatever we say, the supplier will follow. Right. Okay. Now, of course, these are all the good things. And finally, of course, don't forget that's the risk. Right. You want supplier to be financially healthy and robust. They're not going to bankrupt. Okay. And then you have to pay. Right. And second, of course, there should be no IP leakage. They won't come downstream to compete with you, right? It's a lot of data you can collect on this, right? On the supplier's track history, right? You can see if supplier has done this or that, right? Historically, which means they may do it again. I would talk mainly about these criteria, right? From technology, business continuity to cost savings, finally to risk. So we're going to compare suppliers across all these dimensions. Now, let's start with supplier intelligence. We first have to identify potential suppliers globally, right? So look at here, we're looking for, as Apple's iPhone, we're looking for semiconductor suppliers to make our processors, let's say M3. So we need to find across the world, right, where are the semiconductor suppliers, right? Here's a map, right, for semiconductors, right, 2023. So I rank by total revenue. You can see United States has the highest revenue, right, from semiconductors, followed by China and Taiwan, right? Think about this. Taiwan is so little, right? Actually, it's almost the same as China and more than half of United States, which is amazing. And if you look at South Korea and Japan and so on and so forth. This is the overall output in terms of revenue from semiconductors in these countries. So at least you know where to look at, right? Now let's look at different countries, look at their trend, the semiconductor industry trend. You can see that this is United States. Of course, it's the highest, largest, and fast growing, especially during pandemic. But you see, I need to be going down here, right? In year 2023, because that's post-pandemic. And green line shows Taiwan's semiconductor industry. Taiwan is on the rising, especially on the profit. It's extremely profitable, right? And if you look at China, China also has a large size, but the value added is not high enough, right? It's less profitable. Let's say they're making some lower end semiconductors overall. Okay, now let's look at market concentration. Now we know which market to look at or which country to look at, right? Now we need to look at the market shares. Who accounts for how many, right? The major players. We also want to see how competitive the market is, right? Well, if it's competitive, it's good for us as customers, right? So we look at mainly US and Taiwan, for example. Now here's the US number, right? These are all US based or headquartered companies, right? And we look at the market share over time. And what you can see from here is US semiconductor market is very competitive, right? There's a lot of suppliers out there, right? Many choices. And actually it's getting more diversified or less concentrated over time. Right, the top company is still Intel, but look in year 2016, Intel accounts for 40% of the total market. In year 2023, it's only 20%. The market share analysis for Taiwan looks a bit different. Right, Taiwan has a huge well, which is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, TSM. Right, it's actually getting bigger, more concentrated. This market is more stable. It's become more concentrated over time, but you still have a lot of choices here. Now we just look at US and Taiwan separately, right? Let's pull all the companies together from all the countries, and we can see that TSM from Taiwan actually is the largest in year 2023, and Intel become a lot smaller. Let's rank all these companies from different countries, and let's select the potential suppliers. So the first one would be, let's say, TSM, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. We selected as one of our potential suppliers, as well as Intel, Qualcomm, right, Broadcom, not NVIDIA, because NVIDIA is making GPUs. What we need is CPU, right? Advanced Micro Device, AMD, right, and Texas Instruments. And finally, let's pick one of the smaller size companies for diversity, which is Global Foundries. Okay, so here is the summary of all the suppliers we want to evaluate, right? These are the potential suppliers from TSM, Intel, right, to Global Foundries. We have totally 7. Now, you can choose as many as you want. Now, the second thing is, right, how do we measure the leverage? Because we always want an average or bargaining power over our suppliers. Well, at least we need to know how much our bargaining power is, right, to know our position. So here is the bargaining power analysis. Now, I need to tell you, this is surprisingly simple and intuitive. Everything can be quantified, right? Okay, let's first look at leverage, right? What's your leverage? What's my leverage? So who's you and me? So let's say we consider a very simple example, right? Suppose I'm going to buy something from you. Right? I'm the buyer, you are the seller, right? So what's my leverage? My leverage is actually my purchase from you divided by your total sales. Okay, so as an example, if I buy 50% of your sales, I should have an average, right? So that's my purchase from you, right? Divided by your total sales. So which measures my importance to you, right? If I buy 100% of your sales, then I'm your only customer, right? You cannot lose me, right? But versus if I only buy 1% of your sales, I'm not that important, okay? Now your average is the reverse, right? It's my purchase from you, right, divided by my total spend. Okay, which measures your importance to me, right? For example, if my purchase from you is all I buy, meaning 100% of my purchase is from you, then you are very important to me. You are my solo supplier. I cannot afford to lose you, right? But if my purchase from you, right, is only 1% of my total spend, then you're not that important to me, right? So how do you measure bargaining power? It's really the ratio between your leverage and my leverage, right? You are comparing whose leverage is bigger, right? Now, if my leverage is bigger than yours, then I have the bargaining power, vice versa. So example, if I buy 50% of your volume, 50% of your volume goes to me, okay? Which is only 5% of my spend. You think about it, my spend is much bigger, right? Than your volume. That means I overpower you. You cannot do business without me, but I can do business without you. That's what it is. It's only 5% of my spend, but it's 50% of your volume. Now, reverse it, right? If I buy 5% of your volume, but that is 50% of my spend, then you definitely have power over me. Okay, so that's why you'll come up with the bargaining power index, which is actually even simpler, which is essentially the ratio between my leverage and your leverage. So we divide, my leverage by your leverage. And what does this mean? If the bargaining power index is much smaller than 1, that means your leverage is much bigger. Your means supplier, right? The supplier has power, and vice versa. This BPI, bargaining power index, is actually very easy to calculate, right? It's intuitive and very easy to calculate, right? Because it does not require my purchase from you. It only requires my total spend and your total sales. Okay, so essentially you are comparing the customer's total spend with the supplier's total sales. That's it. You don't need to know how much this customer purchased from that supplier. The last piece of information is actually very hard to find, honestly. And you don't need it. So let me use Apple as an example, right? So let's say 2022. Apple's PPI with the integrated circuit suppliers, Apple spent about $67 billion on semiconductors in year 2022, right? That's this number over here, Apple spent. And suppliers' revenue, you can easily to find out. You just Google search it, right? It's everywhere, right? AMD, $23 billion, and the global foundries about 8 billion, and so on and so forth, right? And so divide Apple spend by suppliers' revenue, you get the bargain power index, right? You find out, right? Everybody is about what? Except Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, TSM. It's about 0.91, right? So what that means is Apple spend more than all the suppliers' revenue. So Apple has leverage or power of all the suppliers except TSM. It's not subjective, it's very objective. All right, after we determine the bargaining power, you see where Apple stands in the around the negotiation table, and then let's compare, right, these suppliers, right, side by side using suppliers benchmarking. So what we want to know is their pricing, comparative pricing, of course, their profitability, and their health, which is the risk, right? And finally, their supplying capabilities. Okay, now let's first look at pricing and profitability. Now, I'm sure you understand why we compare the pricing, right? Because that determines how much we pay for their products, right? So, and for pricing, we're going to use gross margin. It's how much you're buying versus how much you sell, right? The difference in between is the value added. It's also the markup of price, right? That actually has an indication of how good is your technology, right? How exclusive is your technology, right? So gross margin has a lot of interesting meanings here. And to measure profitability, we use net margin, which is, of course, makes sense. How much money you make, right? And so here I want to differentiate two types of suppliers. The first type of supplier, which we call ideal suppliers, they are they have attractive pricing, and even with that attractive pricing, they are very, very profitable, and they are the best supplier. Why is that? Okay, because they can continue that attractive pricing for you. Okay, now the second set of supplier is what we call the deceiving suppliers, right? They also have attractive pricing, but they are barely profitable, or they even lose money. Now they are bad because eventually, because they may bankrupt, right? And eventually you have to pay because they are not making money. It just looks very attractive. So that's why you need to dig out the information, dig out the data to find out who they are. All right, now let's apply this methodology, right, to Apple's case. And here, let's have a breakdown of all these 7 different suppliers, semiconductor suppliers. So we have AMD, right? We have Intel, Texas Instrument, and so on and so forth. Now, the first thing I observe is, right, clearly there are 2 groups of suppliers over here. The first group, just look at their gross margin or their cost of goods sold as a percentage of the revenue, right? You will see Global Foundries, which is here, AMD, which is there, and finally Intel. They have different and lower pricing. So their cost of goods sold accounts for more than 50%, right? Even up to 70% of their revenue, right? So they are offering their semiconductors at much lower price, and they are still profitable. If you look at the gray part of the bar, right? These are the net margins. Some of them are quite small, but they are still profitable. Okay, this is the first group, and the second group are these companies such as Texas Instruments, Broadcom, right? TSM, Qualcomm, and so on. Their gross margin is more than 60%, right? It's about 60, 70%, right? And so they were offering their semiconductor at a much higher price, more expensive, and they are also much more profitable. All right. So now you know in terms of pricing wise, right, where to look, right? Now among these more expensive and more profitable companies, you can look at their net margin, and also look at their cost of goods sold. You'll find out TSM actually was offering a lowest price, right? Better than Texas Instruments, better than Broadcom, right? Lower price, but was making the highest net margin, right? And TSM was able to do so. Look at the bar by TSM, right? You only see gray part, which is net income, and the blue one, which is the cost of goods sold. You barely see the others, such as R&D, such as sales general administrative, right? So this company was so competitive, they will be able to compress, right, all these costs to a minimum to squeeze out every penny for their profit, right? And this company is very, very competitive. Right now, we also need to look at the financial health. Now, for critical parts like processors, right, we need suppliers to have rock solid financial health. All right, but you gotta be careful here, right? There's a typical trap you should avoid. That is, your supplier may offer you a one-time good deal, but which turned out to be a long-term crisis, right? For example, they may offer you a heavy discount initially, and then they threaten bankruptcy. Oh, this happens a lot. Watch out for that by looking at their financial health. And for financial health, the best way to look at is their a breakdown of their assets into shareholder equity, into current into liabilities, right? Including current and long-term liabilities. Now, for all these companies, I have this graph here for 2023. You can immediately see, right? Global Foundries has the highest liabilities, which is still fine. They have 32%, nearly 33% of shareholder equity, which is not bad, right? But compared with the other suppliers, it does have the highest, right, liabilities, and together with Qualcomm, right, highest liabilities. But everybody else has very healthy, very low liabilities, right, including AMD, extremely healthy, right, and Intel, very healthy, TSM, right, and here Texas Instrument and so on. They have more than 50% of shareholder equities. So all these companies are very, very healthy. And now let's look at their production and supply chain capabilities. Now, this is not something usually people look at, but after pandemic, it's just become so important, right? So you need to make sure your supplier have sufficient production capacity, which is PPEs, right? Property, plant, and equipment. And that is in the balance sheet. And also, you need to have suppliers who can secure production equipment and raw materials. This is not something people usually look, but it's very, very important. Okay, let's look at the data. So we can break down, right, the assets, right, into more details, right? Here we have cash, we have short-term investment, inventories, long-term investments, and also, of course, property, plant, and equipment. So this number, this percentage represents how much production capacity they have. And immediately you will see, right, three kinds of semiconductors, right? For example, IC suppliers, IC designers, right? For example, AMD and Broadcom, AVGO stands for Broadcom, right? They only have about 3% of the total assets in property, plant, and equipment. They are not really manufacturing anything. They are designers, and they have 70% of intangible assets. That's intellectual property, right? Now, on the other extreme, you have TSM and global foundries. They have more than 55%, right, of their assets in PPEs, and only 2% of IP. So they're not designing anything. They are pretty much just manufacturing or fabrication, right? They're foundries, right? And finally, you have a hybrid that is Intel versus and Texas Instruments, right? They got 30 to 50% of PPEs, right, of their assets. They also has a sizable IP, right? 14 to 16, 18%. So they are the combination. They are hybrid semiconductor manufacturers, right? So, well, if you want to outsource to which one, you definitely don't want to go to AMD and Broadcom, right? Because they barely have enough capacity for themselves. They outsource their production to TSM, right? So now you know where to look. Now let's dig further into this, right, to see who has the most capability, manufacturing capability. And so we plot out the PPEs, right, the absolute value, and also as a percentage of total assets over time, right, for all these suppliers. And what we're seeing here, we have two manufacturers with the highest manufacturing capability in semiconductor. And who are they? They're Intel and Texas and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. Here is Texas Instruments. Now you see the difference, right? Okay, so production capacity wise, TSM is about the same as Intel, which are much bigger than Global Foundries and Texas Instruments, and which are bigger than Qualcomm, AMD, and Broadcom. Okay, having talked about manufacturing, you also need to look at their supply chain capabilities. They will be able to secure raw materials, will be able to secure the manufacturing equipment. Now, it's important for semiconductor, right? So supply chain capability is also important, right? As we can see, Intel actually has the best supply chain capability, right, in this domain, because it has the largest shareholder. It was the largest shareholder of ASML. Even in 2023, Intel still has 3% of ASML's share. In comparison, Samsung 1.6%, TSM, they sold all their shares. And that's why the world's first EUV high NA machines went to Intel. Now, we have to talk about the semiconductor supply chain bottleneck, right? This industry is kind of special. It's very long, and also there's a lot of bottlenecks, right? The first bottleneck is the lithography equipment, right? ASML has 83% of the market share with a back order of about 1.4 years. And the second bottleneck is the foundry, right? I think in year 2021, yeah. And Apple is the biggest customer of TSM, followed by MediaTek, AMD, Qualcomm, Broadcom, and so on. So if you outsource to AMD and Qualcomm, it's equivalent to outsource to TSM, right? Okay, finally, Intel is making transitions. Intel launched its Intel Foundry Service. It's like it's like TSM. So it's a separate entity. It aims to advance to 2 nanometer by 2014. And Intel has publicly announced they want to make chips for all its competitors. So having looked at all of this, I think you got a good idea of their pricing, right? Their manufacturing capabilities, their health, right? And of course, as we talked about before, their bargaining power. So let's summarize everything into the score sheets, right? So we can compare them side by side, right? To select the best suppliers meeting the selection criteria. So here, things are very simple. Just put everybody in the same table, right? From Intel, Qualcomm, Global Foundries to Texas Instruments. And here on the y-axis, we have all the selection criteria, right? From technology to production pricing, profitability, finally techniques and competition, right? And well, here we give you a rating, right? Let's say, for example, Intel, right? Excellent in innovation, right? Technological capability. Production is also excellent. It's probably the best. Production and supply chain capabilities. Pricing also excellent, right? Used to be fair, okay? Used to be very pricey for Intel, but Intel has changed. Profitability, not that great, but it's profitable. Bargaining power, also excellent. Intel is eager to make chips for other manufacturers, for other OEMs. Very healthy. And finally, Intel will now move down, right, to compete with Apple, right? Another example, let's look at maybe AMD, right? AMD is also excellent in terms of technology. However, it barely has any production capacity left, right? Pricing excellent, right? Its gross margin is small. Profitability is fair. It's pretty much the same as Intel. Bargaining power, it should be excellent as well. Right, financial health very good. Need and competition, it's not going to move down to make cell phones. Okay, so you can put all these information up there and compare them side by side. And where do you see most of the green, the excellent? I would say either Intel or TSM, right? Okay, so here is the case conclusion, right? So here is what they should come up with, right? After all these data analysis, right? So for Apple's iPhone 2023, right, the best supplier for processor would be dual sourcing, right? TSM plus Intel as the main foundries, and and Intel can also spread some work to Texas Instruments, AMD, Broadcom, and Qualcomm for their specialties, right? For example, communication, wireless chips, and so on, right? And this is actually, if you look at what Apple actually do in 2023, this is very close to what Apple was doing, except one difference, that's Intel. Apple is still outsource its majority of foundry to TSM. But we think Apple needs to diversify its supply base to reduce risk and cost. Okay, so this is pretty much all the through the Apple's iPhone case, right? We illustrate all the methodologies and also all the analysis for different companies. You could come up with completely different insights, but you are going to use the same procedure. What that procedure is? That's sourcing analytics, right? So know yourself and your suppliers. You will never lose a bargain. Here is the data source. So this is live session. So, and here are the, oh, this is not, because this is a picture, sorry. And let me see if this is, oh, okay. Now here is, it's interactive. The graph is interactive. So you can, this is all the, okay, competitors of Apple. Now this is the supply chain. So of, let's say, this is the value chain actually for all these industries, right? Technology hardware, you can see electronic components, electronic equipment, and system software and so on, right? And if you want to see what's inside each of these industries, you just click on the plus side, and it's going to tell you, all these companies, right, in this from different countries, right? Now, I think different countries is marked by different color and so on. Let me just minimize this. This is the link. Let me copy this link to the chat box.
Yeah.
So you can open now. Let me just make a chat.